Hi, and welcome to another episode of Easy Peasy with the Smithsonian. I'm Allison Leitner. I'm an instructional designer here at the Smithsonian, and I'm here with my colleague Tess Porter, as well as Jim Reese from the Washington International School and Fernanda Garcia from McFarland Middle School in DCPS. We're excited to have you joining us for another episode of Easy Peasy. This week, Fernanda is going to be modeling the routine Unveiling stories for us. And today she's going to be showing how we do this with adults or teachers in a PD setting, in a professional development setting. And on Wednesday, we're going to be looking at how you use that routine in practice with your students. So as always, we want to start off with a social emotional learning question. So I'd like you to use the chat and write, what does it mean to you to be culturally responsive? So as you do that, I'm going to throw it over to Tess.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm excited to be here today. My name is Tess Porter, and I'm a museum educator at the Smithsonian Center for Learning and Digital Access. As some of you probably know, this is part of the Easy Peasy series that we've been holding bi-weekly for the last few weeks. Every session, including this one, is archived. So what that means is for this session, if you want to rewind, share it with a colleague, come back later, you can do so at the same link. All of the other sessions have as well. So you can find them either on our YouTube page or the Smithsonian Learning Lab. Each Easy Peasy webinar comes with a set of resources gathered together into a Smithsonian Learning Lab collection. You can find that also by searching the Learning Lab or by looking in the description of this session. Here we've gathered resources that we're going to talk about today, and that will help kind of extend the ideas we're talking about into further learning environments. I'm going to be screen sharing today, so I'm going to pop kind of off the screen at some point, but I'll come back at the end to walk through this collection resource by resource, show you what's there, and talk about how you can use it to integrate ideas from today into further learning environments. So thank you. And Jim, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Tess, and welcome. And hi, everybody. My name is Jim Reese, and I work at Washington International School. And I do a lot of different things around town that are really focused on using Project Zero ideas in practice. And that's how I got to know Fernanda Garcia, who's our guest educator today. About 4 years ago, I was working on a project for DC Public Schools led by Veronica Boix-Mancia, a researcher at Project Zero. And it was focused on global competence and working with teachers in 3 different DC Public Schools with very, very diverse populations to help them think about global competence and about how they can foster it in their students. And Fernanda was part of the first cohort that we ever worked with. And she was at McFarland Middle School, where she still is. And this routine that she's going to introduce today is a routine that we introduced during that year, and it was developed by Veronica and her team, looking at global thinking routines. So this is exciting for us because we're moving from many artful thinking routines. We've worked with an agency by design routine, and now we're moving into global thinking routines. And so Fernanda is going to guide us with that. So Fernanda has since worked with me on 2 different projects since the Global Competence Project, one on making across the curriculum, and then one last year on Museums Go Global. And she and Tess and Abby Krolik from the organization I work with and Fernanda all work together with a number of other teachers on that project. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Fernanda and let her get us started.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Maria Fernanda Garcia, and I've been a teacher with the District of Columbia Public Schools for the past 10 years. Currently, I'm a teacher leader of instruction at McFarland Middle School, which is a global studies school that offers a dual language program to over half of our 565 students. Our students come from the local neighborhood, larger Washington, D.C., and some of them are immigrants from all over the world, with the largest concentration coming from Central America. Our school staff reflects this diversity as well, which makes culturally responsive teaching a must-have as a framework for working with our students. What is culturally responsive teaching, or CRT? I have a great article that was published by an educational policy organization called New America. It was written by Jenny Muniz, one of their analysts, and she approaches it as a pedagogical framework which posits that the languages, cultures, and identities of students are assets to learning. It sort of defies this deficit model and ensures that students see themselves and their communities reflected and valued in the content that's taught at school. At McFarland, we've adopted this approach. And I would add that beyond just content, we make sure that our students' language, culture, and identity extends beyond what is taught in the classroom and is reflected in all we do and every decision that we make. Because it's our belief that students will, their learning will exponentially increase when they can make direct connections between their school and their lives beyond our classroom walls and into the real world. If you want to read more, feel free to visit that tile. It's right here in this collection, and I'll link you to the publication under the culturally responsive teaching arrow. So if we want to get started, we're going to first do an opener where we're going to look at an artifact to see how culturally responsive teaching, or CRT, might look in real practice. To start, it requires that teachers pay close attention to what students say, do, like, and dislike. This information can be gathered both formally and informally, but often it's the informal moments that can best inform our practice in CRT. So we're going to use this image of a Black Lives Matter everyday button or pin. My question to you, my initial question is, if a student came into your classroom wearing this pin and you noted it, how might you use it to improve your content curriculum? So let's practice this by starting with posing this question to Jim. Jim, if a kid came into your classroom wearing this pin, how might you use it to inform or improve your own content and your curriculum?
That's, it's a challenging question. I think my first reaction is to think that I might wait for a moment after class to have a conversation just with the student who's wearing it, to just probe a bit about the reasons for wearing it and so forth, and then think about the possibility of bringing attention to it or having something that could connect to it at a later date. I don't think I'd want to draw attention to it in class the first moment that I saw it. That's my first reaction.
Okay, so you would take note of it, think about it, talk to the student about it, and then maybe use that as a jumping off point, right? Mm-hmm. In terms of thinking, how can I bring this student's interest or this student's political viewpoint or, the students, what it reflects about the student's community into my classroom and into our classroom. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, I'm just going to share some comments that are coming up. Amy's just said she would ask the student what the pin means to the student. Mm-hmm. And Tad has said you could study the pin as a historical artifact. So thinking about the context in which it comes from, the historical context from which it arises. Uh-huh.
Great. So in my case, so just to model, in my case, if I saw a student expressing a personal or opinion about a political issue by wearing something like a pin, I would definitely see it as an opportunity to bring their identity and their community into our classroom. So in this case, after talking to the student, engaging a little bit of what's their interest, and maybe asking a couple questions to the rest of the class about it, I would want to create a module around the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm a language arts teacher, so we'll still be reading, viewing, discussing, writing about this issue, but we'll be able to do it in depth and strengthen not only their understanding, not only their standard skills, but we'll be able to develop their own position on the issue, because culturally responsive teaching isn't just about learning content. It's also about developing global competence. It's also about continuing to develop identity and ideally developing leadership in our students. Okay, so after an opening like that, we're gonna go right into the thinking routine that I would use to sort of introduce maybe this module to my students. Again, this simulation is going to specifically target you guys as teachers and educational professionals. So we're going to be, everything we're doing is designed for you. On Wednesday, we will be doing the routine again, but we'll be doing it thinking of students as our audience. So continue with the topic of the Black Lives Matter movement. We're going to use a routine called Unveiling Stories. And we're going to use this routine to explore the movement by closely examining an artifact that comes from a collection titled Black Love Matters from the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. The artifact and the routine come from a collection that I created for teachers and adults who are interested in learning how to implement culturally responsive teaching. We're going to look at that collection later on, but I want to note that, again, we're going to use this routine with you as adults as our intended learners. The routine asks us to examine this artifact in layers. Each layer is going to provide us with a distinct viewpoint of the events depicted in the photograph. This will require us to sort of zoom in on the details that we find in the photograph through different lenses. So I want to take a moment, Tess, to sort of zoom in on the artifact itself. Again, it's called Black Love Matters Untitled. It is a photograph. I would like us to zoom in on the top left quadrant of the image and just slowly take in the details that we see in the image. And as we take note, we slowly move down to the lower left quadrant, taking in details, taking in images, colors, light, writing. Scan over slowly to the lower right quadrant. Again, taking note. What do we see? What is giving us, ideas and information? Scanning up to the upper right quadrant. So I'd like to ask you a question, and that is, based on what you see, what is the story here? What's the overall general story of this photograph? What's the story? What is it telling us? You're welcome to put your comments in the chat box. We can start with Jim too. Jim, what do you see? What's the story, the overall story?
Sure. So in thinking about a narrative, I think I certainly see a lot of characters, human beings who could serve as characters in this story, and I see a movement that's going from left to right. Even though this person in the foreground is looking in the opposite direction, most of the movement is heading to the from left to right. Sorry, from right to left. And so there's something about forward motion. Again, it's a group that's gathering. There are a lot of clues to what might be happening, and I'm making an assumption here about it that people are either protesting or doing something along those lines, just by what's being carried and people coming together. There's also the smoke in the background, so there's just a lot of clues there about it being something's just not right.
So when we think about the over and general story, one scaffold that we can use to sort of develop a statement, this is a story about, would be thinking about who it might be, where it might be, what might be going on, why. So there are some clues in the artifact that could be helpful. If you look at the upper right, there's the name of a business, and over the name of the business is sort of like a clue about where it's taking place. You also have the artifact in the middle, which is a common image in our country, but there's something different about the way it's being displayed in this photograph specifically. So using that information, what could we say is the story? If we were to form a statement about what story is being told, what is the story? And again, you're free to be specific and to make a judgment, because again, this is a thinking exercise. We're not really looking for right and wrong. We're looking to get out ideas.
So we've had a number of people in the chat note that the flag is upside down. Yes. Both that it's upside and that is often a distress signal. So in this case, the distress is exhibited by the demonstrators. Amy noticed that people are gathering. It seems like a common purpose, but it's at night. And Ashley's noticing that she sees the phrase "lost voices" on the individual in the foreground, and that says maybe it's a protest or a demonstration to bring voice to those who are not able to.
Wonderful. Okay, so the story would be, this is a protest. being enacted by people who feel like their voice isn't being heard. And we could center it in a specific place if we chose to, based on the information that's available in the photograph in a specific time that we know occurred in our real world, right? So we could add those details to our statement. Jim, using that information, would you try to put together a statement about what is the story? Now that we've looked at it a little closer and taken in some of our colleagues' comments?
Sure. So I would say that it's a gathering of angry protesters who are upset about the incidents that have happened in Ferguson, Missouri, probably in 2014.
Great. So we have a story. Again, every teacher is going to have, their own version of the events based on their viewpoints on what they noted in the photograph, but we do have a general story. So next in the routine, we're going to look at another layer. So we're going to ask ourselves to look at it again, but this time solely from the perspective of the people. What is the human story? Going beyond who, what, when, where, why, Ferguson, 2014, Black Lives Matter. What is the human story here? What is the story of these people or one of the people? You could choose to focus in on someone specific that you see in the photographs, such as the woman holding the upside down flag, or you can choose to focus in on someone else or the group as a whole. What is the human story here? If we were to tell it again through that frame, what would it be? Please comment. Please, if you're coming in, Jim, again, you can always participate and kind of help get us started.
Sure, I'm gonna pick up on two comments that I've read because they're comments that I was going with something I was thinking about as well. One would be with the person in the foreground who's holding the upside down flag, who has the LV Lost Voices on the T-shirt. So There's a story there about what is the person turned around to see. So I'm thinking about what's happening off the canvas of the photograph. What's behind this person, and what is she saying, and so forth and so on there. And then the second one is based on something that Cher had written about people gathering in the Black Lives Matter movement, protesting the death by the police of a young Black man. And so this human story of who's someone who's lost his life, of all the repercussions with that, of the sense of hopelessness when something like that happens.
Okay, wonderful. So we're going to move into the third question. Again, each question is designed to give, an answer that is rich, and it just gets richer and deeper as we go through the routine. So the next question is going to be, now that we've looked at the general story and the human story, how can we extend this to the rest of the world? It could be our nation, it could be the world. What is the world story? How can we extend this specific event, this specific place and people, and connect it to a larger issue or a broader conflict or broader events, right, happening in our world? So I'd ask you to form a statement. What is the world story being told here through this image?
So Cher shared that protests that involve mostly people of color are often militarized by the local and state police in a way that protests of whites are not, which I think speaks to this next question.
Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. What else do we? What is the world connection?
Yeah, it makes me think of connections to other protest movements in this country. So I think about the anti-Vietnam War protests that happened in the late 60s and early 70s. I think about the civil rights movement, women's rights movement, gay rights movement. All of those started off as very peaceful movements, but often turned violent because of, again, oftentimes local police or military getting involved and inflaming the emotions. It also makes me think about just protest movement around the world and citizen action when citizens get so upset about something that they feel the need to gather and to protest and to show their displeasure. I think there's that connection around the world with other groups that have felt marginalized or unjustly treated.
So your response, it helps me, understand as an educator, doing this with you, that this routine, just based on your answer, is an excellent way to generate prior knowledge when you're going into a new topic, such as the Black Lives Matter movement. So by making these connections to the world and, history, students are able to start generating a deeper understanding of what they're going to be reading. And of course, that is a pre-reading strategy that's super important because it prepares the student to comprehend and take in the text in a much deeper way. So thank you so much. Once we've done those 3 questions, we're going to move into 2 questions that are require a little more imagination and creativity and ownership on behalf of the students. So sometimes they require some scaffolding. Let's practice some of that scaffolding, and of course with teachers and adults as well. Let's practice some of that scaffolding with the next question. So the question that would follow is, what is the new story? Is there something from this artifact that we can take away that's new, that we didn't know or think about or consider before? Ferguson happened a few years ago. So how can we frame it now that time has passed? New events have transpired since. How do we frame it in a new way? So what is the new story that might extend from this photograph? But again, this happened in the past. How can we extend it into a new way? What is the new story?
So I do struggle with that question, and again I think I would benefit from some scaffolding.
Okay, so thinking about those questions, like if you think about the fact that this happened in the past, this happened in 2014, right? Looking at it today in 2020, right? Is there a new way to frame this? Is it just about the events in Ferguson? Is it just about that specific time in the Black Lives Matter movement when it was sort of, generating a lot of support? Or is there a way to sort of take that and frame it in a new way with what's going on today?
Okay. Yeah.
So if you think about the Ahmaud Arbery situation.
Right. That's exactly that's where my mind went to, is that, again, a case where a young African-American male has been gunned down, and and so much surrounding it, it's just so difficult to understand. And in this case too, it was just so difficult for people to get their heads around how something like this could have happened, and yet we've seen a pattern of it happening over and over again. And so there's this, every time something like this happens, there's almost this newness of outrage that when one I think has to ask, when is it going to stop, or how do we get this kind of thing to stop, or what is going to happen to our country if we can't get our house in order to stop things like this happening? Okay,
so that question, what is going to happen to our country if we can't get these events in order and get it to stop happening? So that's sort of like the new story, right? That question becomes a new way to frame this, because in 2014 we were talking about stopping it. In 2020 we're like, when is it finally going to stop?
Fernanda,
this movement has been going on for like 8 years now, since Trayvon Martin, and we're still seeing the same things happen over and over again. So what is that new story? How do we frame that in today's context?
I was going to mention something that Janice wrote, which I think really gets at your question about the newness of it as well. She wrote that this incident is part of a pattern. Cell phones have brought incidents to light that have been happening for many years. So while for some of us it might feel as if is this a new phenomenon? The new phenomenon is that we're able to record things so much more quickly and spread that information around than we used to be able to do. And so maybe that's what's the new story here.
Kirsten also has an interesting comment. She says there are connections to ongoing inequities between the lives of white and Black citizens and other people of color. And we're seeing these disparities in the prevalence of COVID-19. So I'm bringing it really very present moment.
Exactly. And again, this is the way for students and teachers to make connections to the real world. Again, you're taking an artifact and then bringing it into what's currently happening, you know, and how does this connect to us? Why is this important? Why should we learn this? Okay. Why should we care about this? All right. Last question in the routine is always the trickiest because it requires the most creativity and definitely, you know, that higher level thinking. And so this question is, what is the untold story? So if we look at this photograph and this artifact, how can we make a jump or extend it to a story that isn't necessarily being told in this artifact, but it leads us to wonder and question about this story? So one of the scaffolds that we can do for this, works with adults, works with students, comes from another thinking routine designed by Agency by Design, which is called Voice and Choice. And that routine, and I believe the title is in this collection, so you can take a closer look at it. That routine, there's a part of it that talks about, that asks us to examine whose voices are present and whose voices are absent. Thinking about whose voices are present in this photograph, in this image, and then whose voices are absent from this image. That voices who are absent, those are the ones that then we can use to sort of start creating what is the untold story. Something that we know or we imagine is happening or related to this image and these events, but isn't necessarily depicted in this image itself. So let's think about the voices present and the voices absent. Anyone, Jim, have any ideas about whose voices are present in this artifact?
Yeah, I think, you know, it seems to me that the surrounding community, the people who feel most outraged by this incident in their own community are the ones whose voices are being depicted here. Again, I don't know that for sure. It could be there's some people who I know that people came from far away to participate in these protests, but I do think that there are most likely community members who are there. So it makes me think about community members or members of communities outside of Ferguson, where something like this might have happened, but perhaps because there wasn't the technology or somebody didn't record it, something like this might have happened and slipped the attention of the rest of the world. And so it makes me think about, you know, how often is this kind of thing happening, and how, you know, what happens when we don't have the benefit of technology to have that kind of visual or audio evidence.
And I'd like to highlight, and we're not gonna be able to go into this whole routine because our time is pretty tight, but I would like to highlight something that Jim is doing and has been doing throughout this routine, which teachers will do as you lead them through this, which is asking questions. A lot of times when you're looking to deepen a student's understanding of a content, of a concept, or an event, you know, you want them asking questions, because those questions are sort of preparing the ground for then the learning that is going to happen once the content is presented. So thank you, Jem. Your questions have been really great way to sort of highlight some of the key parts, the key benefits of using this routine. So we're going to end soon. So I just want to make sure I ask this question to the audience, and that is thinking about your own experience, maybe leading PD or teaching in the classroom, and thinking about this specific topic. What is the value of opening a lesson on Black Lives Matter with this routine and this artifact? What could be a value of using this routine, this artifact? There's similar artifacts in the collection itself that I created that, you know, can be used. There's a lot of choice, but what is the value of opening it with something like this routine, Unveiling Stories?
And why don't we have, if people want to, in the live comments, write a response to Fernanda's questions. And in the meantime, we're going to switch to Tess and have her take us through that collection that Fernanda has mentioned.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Tess, you're muted. Tess?
Thank you, Jem. So as I was saying, we've been navigating through the collection this entire session. As I mentioned at the beginning, this webinar is archived. You can watch it again at the same URL, share it with a friend. You can also find it in the Smithsonian Learning Lab. And to accompany this webinar, we've created a Learning Lab collection of resources. resources that we looked at today together, and other resources that can help extend this exploration. You can search Easy Peasy in the Smithsonian Learning Lab to find the webinars and this Learning Lab collection. You can also easily find this Learning Lab collection by looking in the description of today's webinar. I wanted to briefly walk through a few pieces in particular that I think will be helpful to you. So this collection is divided into sections, pulling together resources that we looked at today, including the Black Lives Matter pin and the photograph that we just looked at together. It also includes the routine Unveiling stories that Fernanda just did a wonderful job walking us through. I wanted to note that when you're viewing this routine in the lab, if you click on the information button on the left-hand side of the screen, it'll show information from Harvard on how this routine works, the types of thinking it supports, and suggestions for using it for learning. Likewise, as Fernanda just mentioned, she recommended the routine Voice and Choice to help approach the final question in Unveiling stories, what is the untold story. Here we've uploaded a PDF of this routine walking through the same things. What questions do you ask here? What are some tips for facilitating it, and more? In the context and background section, we've included some resources to help provide context not only for using Project Zero thinking routines, but also exploring this topic with either with yourself as an educator or translating this with students. The first resource here is a video from Project Zero talking about the power of Project Zero thinking routines. We have a couple articles from The New Yorker here as well, including a focus on a cover of the January 2015 issue that reimagines a historical photograph, including victims like Michael Brown and others. It's a reworking of this photograph of Martin Luther King Jr. The second article focuses on the Black Lives Matter movement and provides more context on the movement itself. Likewise, there's a resource here from the Freedom Forum Institute focusing specifically on Ferguson and understanding the events that happened there. And then we've pulled in the other photographs in the Black Lives Matters series, which are all just as striking as the one that we looked at together. And so I highly recommend looking through these. I think they'll also be really wonderful resources for teaching about this movement and exploring this movement with whatever group of learners you're working with. And then finally, Fernanda has pulled in some fantastic resources that she's both built and aggregated to help support you in a culturally responsive teaching practice. The first is a PowerPoint for an inquiry cycle that she developed on culturally responsive teaching. The second is an article that Fernanda mentioned earlier on culturally responsive teaching and current policy in the US. And then we've talked about this a little bit, but Fernanda also built another Learning Lab collection focusing on culturally responsive teaching targeted for educators. She has developed a group of instructional try-its here with museum resources and suggested questions for digging into them. So I highly recommend checking this out. It's a wonderful resource. And finally, in the webinar section, we include a link to today's webinar here and online courses from Project Zero that I hope will be helpful to you in moving forward. With that, Allison, I want to turn it back to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Fernanda and Jim and Tess. I think this has been another really great session. So as we leave today, be thinking about when we started, we asked what being culturally responsive means to you. So think about what that means in terms of your teaching practice. And then we hope very much to see you on Wednesday, where Fernanda is going to show us how we might use this routine in the classroom with our students. So enjoy the rest of your Monday, and we will see you on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.